Hello everyone, welcome on a new episode of RobertSpotlight. 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 RobertSpotlight.
Doing all this moderation stuff for Discord.
I'm a social media futurist.
Been a moderator at Be Friends.
Now it's my project because I love sports.
I'm speaking at NFT NYC.
Welcome on the show. Hello everyone, welcome on a new episode of RobertSpotlight and RobertSpotlight today. Vikram, welcome on the show.
Thank you, Robert. Pleasure having you here and super excited about this.
Perfect. So let's go directly on your presentation. Could you describe yourself for people that don't know you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Vikram, the co-founder and the CEO of DaoLens. DaoLens is something which we have been sweating on for almost 9-10 months now. Our goal is very simple. We simply work with any and every Web3 community that may be doing things such as NFT groups hanging out together. It could be a creator having his folks who are getting rewarded in tokens. It could be a gaming guild. It could be a protocol. It could be an ecosystem level community. And we simply simplify their operations. So in terms of a community, we work with them to figure out how do they make sense of who's coming in, how do they onboard people, how do they activate it, what about the operations, where are discussions happening, how do you really ensure that there is no silos between all the different tools that a community is doing. That's DaoLens for you. And professionally, I was previously working at Merkle Science, which is in crypto forensics and blockchain compliance. So think of it like somebody comes and takes away your crypto, or there's a rug pull. You essentially go up to the authorities. Now, if you go to the FBI, they're supposed to do some sort of a check, and they would use a tool like Merkle Science to identify who the scammer may be. I have been in the crypto space since 2015. I have a product and design background, and I keep jumping a lot between India, where my engineering team sits, and the West Coast in San Francisco, where there are a lot of crypto folks who I hang out with.
Perfect. So how long have you been on the blockchain world?
2015 onwards. I think I got introduced to the world of blockchain through Bitcoin, and that was in 2015 through Khan Academy. Surprisingly, I ran into a course on Khan Academy. I had decided to let go of my internship. I was still in college back then. And I was like, hey, this looks pretty interesting. So what started out just as a casual course sort of became an understanding where you never really get out of it. So you start understanding Bitcoin, then Ethereum launched a year later, then DAOs got introduced, then CryptoKitties came in, and then the world of DeFi popped in. So there have been a lot of ups and downs, but once you start understanding the basics, you know that blockchain or cryptocurrencies for that matter, they are way more than just a get-rich-quick scheme, and which is why I was fairly confident that I'm going to be building in this sector anytime, like now or in later, because that's essentially going to be what most of the world migrates towards. It doesn't make sense not to adopt Web3 with all the inspirational things or what, like there's still some sort of a friction, but I think that's going to go out with all the innovation that's happening in the space. So in a few years, Web3 is where it would be like the de facto choice. And I have anyway been someone who always wants to explore tech. So that pretty much explains it.
Perfect. You just say that you see a little bit of friction. Could you deep dive a little bit?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think majority of what we do here at DaoLens as well, and for that matter, in general, pick any space, whether it's dApps that have very complex user experiences, whether you put DeFi where it's on one way a financial breakthrough, but on the other way, you'll see like a lot of projects that come with some insane returns, they end up collapsing because of all of these malpractices. So in terms of what are the regulations around it, what are the best practices around it, or for that matter, if you are a founder today thinking of starting Web3, every learning that you have in Web2 carries forward, but essentially, how are you really going to market it? Because there's no Google email, there's no Facebook, there's no LinkedIn. People have their own wallets. There's a lot of anonymity around what you're going to do. So marketing or playbooks around that, or for that matter, even in communities, that we have been working with DAOs for specific, to be specific, we see a lot of friction in the form of what it is that the DAOs really want. Specifically, the smaller DAOs, they are so small that with the token prices like going 70-80%, it just sort of like upsets them in a bad way, to the extent where the community starts focusing just on surviving as opposed to functioning, right? Like, so most of these people are doing DAOs in the form of side hobbies, if you like, leave the top 20-40 DAOs out. And that essentially means that there is still a lot to be defined in terms of how are you really going to ensure that people are voting, because you give somebody a token, you ask them to vote, you have introduced governance, but then they don't show up. So how do you really handle that? How do you handle education for that matter? Because we have like what, 11 billion MetaMask wallets, and I don't think all of them are even unique. So even if we go be optimistic and say 11 million of the wallets are unique, that's like barely 1%, 0.001% probably of the world that is supposed to migrate to Web3. So it's not happening just because it's a new tech. It's also happening because there's a friction in terms of how does the average person feel confident. It's being marketed to all the new people who are getting started in Web3. But what about that person who's been there for 10 years in the traditional world, and they're just curious that, hey, what can I really do? Who's going to help them with the shift? Who's going to make it really easy for them? How do we make crypto as a layer invisible, so that technology is always invisible, right? Like when you're like swiping your card, you do not really care about the 300 things that are happening in terms of something getting authenticated in the backdrop. You just swipe your card, you enter your PIN or you tap on it, and you're good to go. But in Web3, we are pretty much still like, we are asked to swipe the card, and then we are asked to do like 1,000 things, and then something moves forward. So I think that is what I meant by friction.
Okay, makes sense. And just before moving to DAO, because it's a thought that I have since I'm interested in Web3, it's what you said, the way that I will describe it, it's like what it's needed right now, it's more people building for the world, to make it simpler, right? But when people build on top of Web3, they are creating sometimes centralized things, and the ethos of Web3 is decentralized. So what is your thought on the Web3 being decentralized, but more and more things built on it, it's centralized?
Yeah, absolutely. And Robert, I think there is an explanation to why that's happening, right? Like, see, any shift from the traditional way of doing work needs time, right? Like Web3 has been there for almost, if I just go on and take 2017 as the time when Web3 really, really exploded, and maybe like just count the days from it, you will see that we have barely spent 4 to 5 years, which is a very small time in the time frame that concepts, ways of working, industries, the de facto mode of what constitutes the right way of doing processes and so on are defined, right? Like, so the reason it's also happening is because if you go the decentralized route, unfortunately, cryptocurrency made a massive mistake. Like the world of crypto made a massive mistake of focusing first just on the prices. Like to a large extent, many people that I know of got introduced to crypto because they probably knew that, hey, there is this token that's going to go up in price. Nobody got introduced to it because of, like how a decentralized community is coming together and it's so cool, and then discovered, oh, there's a token associated to it. And I think that introduction, the mistake that we made in the early days where we were just talking about how the asset prices are going up and up, has probably like gotten us into that effect where there are a lot of people who are there for the wrong reasons. They want to maybe just hang out. They just maybe want to identify what's the next thing which could go big, which is nothing bad, nothing wrong about it. But that sort of like shadows a little bit of the core work that's happening. And which is why you will see like it's the absence of migration. If I'm thinking about building a tool today, even if I want to go on and decentralize on day one, how am I really going to rely on whether the work is happening or not? How do I really ensure that people are equally accountable? How do I know that they're not going to just run away after like having gotten some tokens in promise of some of the work that they would do and whatnot? Those things are still pretty undefined. And then we end up as human beings, we end up taking the safe route. So it's like, okay, let's keep things in control. That's probably going to be easier. And I think that's simply one justification. But on the other end, I also know of some very close circles and elite groups where people are extremely committed to going decentralization established, right? Like you have a group of people who are just working in a completely decentralized fashion and nobody is really bothered about just short-term success. They are thinking about token prices is probably the last thing that they're even thinking about. At this point in time, it's about, hey, how do we clarify the regulations? How do we encourage more people to build on it and so on? So there is work happening. It's not like everyone is going the centralized route, but for a lot of people, they're going centralized because of three main reasons. One is the lack of infrastructure available for you to really go and build things at scale in Web3. The second is its majority of the crowd still is like lurkers who are creating a lot of noise, and that like usually ends up distracting most of the folks. And then the third thing is it's also partly because we are so used to the centralized way of working that it's one thing to say that, hey, I'm going to let this random person sitting out of Siberia make a call on what my website's color or banner or messaging should be. But when it really starts happening, you're like, oh, but I have not really grown up. You see, 20 years of my life I have spent understanding and then a decision being made by a group of people and it being run. So it's one thing to say that we're going to embrace decentralization, but when it really happens, most of the people end up asking, but this doesn't feel right, right? Like there are developers who come with tangential ideas. In fact, I have a story for you here. When DaoLens started, we went decentralized on day one, right? Like, and we realized that we were trying to build a DAO tooling, DAO platform sort of a thing. This was 7-8 months back. And we were getting ideas from people who were coming and saying, hey, why don't you do a token launch? Why don't you go build a NFT community? Why don't you go build a gaming thing? And that's like a lot of variables for an early company or an early group of people to comprehend, right? Like, so in some way, centralization is also essential in the early days. And I think it essentially goes back to this core idea, which is pretty well established, that you progressively decentralize in places where centralization on day one may not be the wiser choice. That is what we ended up doing. We took back the control. We said, hey, let's pause. We need to really define some guardrails so that people are not like just running in random directions, because then it's just going to be a lot of wasted effort. And that's how I think of the whole centralization and decentralized world piece.
Perfect. Thank you. Because you have made a great transition. And now let's talk about DaoLens. So first, what is a DAO? For people that don't know, what is a DAO?
Yeah. Let's keep it super simple, no technical jargons. I just see DAOs as a group of people who are coming together to make stuff happen. Now, there are a few rules for this group of people to operate, right? Like you need to have put some stake for you to have a say in what the group is doing. What that means is I probably have to put in $100 before I can go in and say, hey, you know what? Maybe let's paint the wall behind me red in color. And the reason we are also doing this is because we want the person who's in the group to not just randomly make decisions, but for them to actually be having a skin in the game so that they make decisions that are actually for the betterment of the community, right? Like now, that's a group of people making decisions with a shared wallet because everyone has put in $100. So now there is like $500 and there are 5 people and all of them can like at any point in time go on and say, hey, I need $200. But then comes, what if I go on and say, I need $200 to paint the wall red? Does it really make sense? It's at that point in time when you start deciding that, okay, anyone can come up with proposals or thoughts on what they want to do, but majority of the community should agree. And that is where voting comes in, right? Like, and the beauty of a DAO is that many of the DAOs are adopting processes where part or like whole of this is sort of like being governed by smart contracts. So think of a centralized setup where you go on and say, hey, Robert, if you do well, and if you're able to hit this target in a centralized company, I'm going to give you promotions at the end of 6 months. But let's say 6 months down the line, when you've really hit the target, I can go back on my word saying, you know what, the market is really down. Is it okay if we push it back by 6 months? And that's not fair because you were promised that in the first place. Maybe you were working with a motivation in mind. So the idea is to have smart contracts or logic in place, which says that if Robert is able to hit what he was said, the computer is automatically going to execute. In this case, the execution is going to be your promotion or it is going to be your payout. So you are basically removing human beings or human factors from decision making, which makes the system more trustworthy. And there's a term for it called trustless, right? Like it's not absence of trust, but it's like you do not have to trust people that they will be honest to what they committed on, because there's a code that's automatically going to do things. So if you like regroup everything, a group of people working together with a shared bank account, anyone can float a proposal, everyone gets to vote on it, and you have some logic in the back end deciding that, okay, a computer is going to make sure that whatever was promised or whatever was agreed upon is going to stay. That's how I look at DAOs. Now, you can have a DAO for anything. You can have a DAO for 5 developers coming together and building a tool. You can have a DAO for 10 people pooling in their money and like collectively deciding where the group should invest money so as to like increase returns. And the goal in some cases is just really helping out. But in many cases, it's also at times about how do you really increase the treasury size. So if we have $500, can we make it 1,000 so that all 500 of us can actually get back 100 extra in return, right? Like, and there are beautiful outcomes that come when you're thinking about a DAO. For example, in a centralized company, again, when you do a project, you are said, hey, great work, here is a recognition or a trophy for you, and you take home whatever your salary was. But in a DAO, sometimes there are proposals which come and say, you know what, I'm going to make this happen, but if I'm able to really get you a 1,000 subscribers who will pay you $10 each for every new subscription that you get after 1,000, I'm going to be asking you to pay me $1 out of those $10. It's sort of like a royalty fee or a sourcing fee. And if that is a proposal and the community agrees to it, there are ways for me to make money for the effort also that I put in, right? Like, of course, I achieved what I said, but then how do I really get a return for all the hard work that I put in? Because in companies, the products you build, they bring millions in a recurring fashion, but that million is not really hitting you. So DAOs are also great in that way. Like, it helps people get a piece of the original reward that the company may be having.
Okay, so I would say that if I have to summarize, it's the trustless aspect and the kind of reward that someone can get back.
Yeah. And yes, trustless aspect, way for people to get rewarded back. And then on top, I would definitely add that everyone is equal. So there is no hierarchy. Like when you're trustless, you can go make the changes that probably in a centralized setup, only the board or the CEO could think of. If you are logical, the community is going to agree to it. If the community is going to agree to it, no stopping you.
Okay, so if you have it's a good one. If you have to compare, DAO being on a Web3 and something on a Web2, what would be the compare on a Web2?
Yeah, I think the way. So, what do you mean? What would be the comparison on Web 2? Could you elaborate?
It's like me saying that DAO, it's something that we can build since to Web3 technology. So I would say, what was the unit, represent a DAO without the Web3 technology?
I am still not sure.
You said kind of a committee, an executive committee or
So in the Web2 world, you have an executive committee, a centralized board that's making all the decisions, right? Like you walk into a company, there is an HR who holds your hand, they walk you through everything, they explain. Like there's a group of people who are in positions of power. In DAOs, what ends up happening is because it's a community, you can get into that position of power if you are like consistently or you're like continuously adding value. So if you are standing out for whatever you came in for and you are delivering value every day, people are going to notice and they're going to say, hey, Robert is doing a great job. Let's put him in charge of this working group, right? Like, and you can make proposals, there's full transparency. And that's pretty much, I think, what's the core difference is. But additionally, if you were right now thinking that, oh, Web3 is a brilliant way, let's go the DAO route or a decentralized route, what ends up happening is in a centralized setup, decisions making are like a little quicker, right? Like because you have a group of people who know they're supposed to make a decision. So when 5 of them get into a room, they can make a decision and wrap up the whole process in 30 minutes. In the decentralized setup, it's not possible for you to like get 1,000 people who are a part of your community in a room because they may be spread all across the globe. There is no entry barrier for somebody not being a part of the company. So in that case, you can expect that decisions will move slightly slower, though they are more democratic.
Okay. And what are the current workaround that DAO, let's say a DAO with 1,000 member in it? What can be the workaround that this kind of DAO put on the table to speed up a little bit the process of making?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's already like there are multiple experiments that are being done, but we can just talk about a couple of top models. One is like the sub-DAO route, where you go on and say that, hey, there is a DAO, but in that you are having these sub-DAOs or working groups or guilds. There are these different terms that come with slight variations in terms of what they really mean or what exactly is the way in which things are getting done inside. But essentially the goal is that in a sub-DAO, somebody is just looking after marketing. Somebody is just looking after, let's say, marketing. Then that person has their own budget and they have the full autonomy to do it. And there is one sub-DAO lead or a pod leader, and they're supposed to do it. So it's partly centralized, wherein like if you're trying to change something on the website, you don't have to go on and talk to the person who's doing accounting as well, but you still do not have the independence to do whatever you feel right. So as a sub-DAO, you can decide based on everyone who has expertise in marketing, but then you have to still go on and convince the rest of the community saying, hey folks, the best of the marketing folks have decided this. I think you all should support it. But again, you have the freedom to like reject it and whatnot. So that's probably one model which is being experimented upon in terms of how exactly do you define a sub-DAO, how many decisions should be made by them, what should be the restrictions on them, and so on. But I think that's mostly the work that is being done. And the second thing is, one, because of crypto, and this is partly sad, because of crypto's prices going down, a lot of DAOs that were happy operating in a decentralized setup 1.5, 2 years back, even last year, have now moved to that stage where the work that is being done by community is still like only 10% or 15% of the all the work that the DAO does. But that doesn't mean that anything is like centralized or there are random people making decisions. It just means that you are now relying more on the core community members to consistently deliver value. So it's not like an employment. I'm a part of that community and I can get paid on a monthly basis for delivering a certain amount of work that I have been asked to. But again, like all the things that are good in a DAO, for example, transparency, getting a buy-in from everyone, and all of that is still available. And I think this is mostly to do with the crypto prices plummeting, and then suddenly people who were joining these DAOs in hopes of making a lot of money for doing something very small. And that was so true. Like last year when we had a bull run, I had seen like there were tasks such as write a Twitter thread and get paid $500. So when you have something like that, like writing a Twitter thread on maybe that project that you are going to join, and when you have something like that, you have like 10,000 people coming in because it's easy money.
Yes.
But then when the crypto prices fall down, suddenly everyone started running away. So DAOs understood that, okay, that's going to be tough if we just rely on community members and we're probably never able to be going to achieve it. So they have like, again, brought in some sort of a core committee that's responsible for most of the work that's being done.
Okay, perfect. What would be the, so you defined one way of working. What are the other, to handle the workaround to speed up a little bit the process of voting?
Yeah, I think like it's essentially the first thing is, of course, how you are structured in the form of a community. The second thing is more in terms of how are really proposals routed, right? Like, so you see, when you go on and involve the community, there are decisions that you can take, which are to say that if you do not object to it, the decision is going to move forward, as opposed to unless you support it, the decision is going to move forward. Let me elaborate it, right? Like, so there are 100 people and I go on and say, hey, I have floated this proposal that the wall behind me needs to be red. And unless 51 people come and vote for it, it's not really going to move ahead. Instead, if I go on and say, you know what, people, we think that the wall behind it should be red. You have 72 hours. And if 51 people or 50 people object to it, we will not do it. In that case, it's easier because decisions will move faster because you're not asking everyone to make an effort. If you really believe against it, you just go on and object to it, right? Like, so that's one of the ways. The other things which we've also seen is how are really decisions not being influenced, because a lot of time what ends up happening is when you have, let's say, something on the lines of 51 out of the 100 people have to vote, then it takes forever because maybe the 51 people are not really even looking at the community proceedings on a day-to-day basis. So you can come up with certain alternatives saying, okay, if 20 people saw it, right? Like, and in 20, if 20 people voted on it and we have a majority of the 20 hitting that number, or maybe 51 don't have to say yes, if most of the people who said yes, that number is higher than the people who said no, and we have at least 10 people saying yes, we will still count that as a decision that the community agrees on. So there are these nuances that you can play around with in terms of decision making, and there's like, we could probably chat about it for a whole day as far as these experiments and these changes go. But those are some of the key things that you will probably observe as you start going and looking at all the DAOs in and around.
Okay, perfect. And what is the biggest misconception about DAO that you ever heard?
Yeah, I think this is a very personal one, but now the biggest misconception in DAOs is that it's still something where anyone can probably go and get the work done. But DAOs have realized with the crypto prices and the topic that we just talked about that there is a core team of people. So you have to really make your way into the core team of people, because if you're really relying on the entire community to come and chime on for the work that's to be done, it's a lot of uncertainty in terms of timeline, in terms of what will be achieved when. So that's the first misconception. And the second misconception is that DAOs are really not places where you can just come in and like do nothing, or it's not just like for a group of people who have shared interest to hang out. Because I see many people coming and saying, hey, do you think DAOs really have any use case? And they have use cases, right? Like there are real life examples of DAOs, specifically examples around investment DAOs, some product DAOs that had come in, some grant management DAOs, some DAOs which are doing things like EIP, which is in the Ethereum improvement proposals, right? Like, so you can really go in and identify these improvements in the way the whole chain is working and get people to agree to it and rally behind it. So essentially from a surface level, it just looks like it's a group of people who are hobbyists or who like share a common interest, who are hanging out casually. But there's some serious work happening, right? Like tools such as Gnosis Safe and so on are valued at over $1 billion today. And all it started out was like a group of people who said that, hey, we're going to build something. I'm not saying that that's the best example of a DAO for that matter, because Gnosis, the team that built the tool, is not necessarily the one that was exactly in the Gnosis DAO, but you still see glimpses of these innovations happening. And unless you start really recognizing that, you will never be able to truly admire what can the future see as far as DAOs go. So I see like one of the misconceptions is it seems like, it's a democratic process and democratic processes are terrible. Maybe you don't really want to go to that. I don't think that's true. It's agreed that 100% decentralization may slow decisions down, but with some improvements and 100% transparency, you can have a very good trade-off between the two, where you can like ensure that you're not really giving power away to one person. And then the third thing is like you need to be an expert. Most of the people have a misconception of, oh, I can't really contribute to a DAO. I can pick anyone in the world and give them 5 DAOs that they could contribute to. And it's not just free contribution. When you contribute an hour to a DAO, you get paid for it, probably more than what a centralized company will pay for doing the same thing. But it's simply about identifying. So there are DAOs that are doing things for people interested in fashion. There are DAOs that are doing things for people interested in ocean. There are DAOs that are doing things for people interested in climate tech and green tech. There are DAOs that are doing things for philanthropy. There are DAOs that are building software. There are DAOs that are building movies. There are DAOs
everything basically.
Sorry?
For everything basically.
For everything, there is a DAO. And you just have to like say that, okay, hey, maybe I don't understand tech, but you can still join a tech DAO, because a tech DAO is not all only full of developers. Somebody is writing content. Somebody is doing their marketing strategy. Somebody is good at video editing. Somebody is good at graphic design. Somebody is good at strategy. Somebody is good at people and community management, right? Like, and you need everyone to come together. That's the beauty of it. So anyone can walk into a community, show that they can do stuff, right? Like, and Robert, this is very personal to me, which is most of the people, this would count as probably misconception number 4 and quite an important one as far as my personal views go, is that in a centralized world, let's say you are an accountant or you are a marketing manager and you're doing marketing, and you feel like, hey, you know what, I think I'm also good at brand strategy. And as an accountant, you go on and say, I have been feeling interested in operations or strategy and I wanted to see if I can do something. They're probably going to look on your resume, your past experience, and say, you know what, we don't feel really comfortable with it. We already have a strategy team. Why don't you go do this training and then come back or something like that? You will hear some sort of a response on those lines. In a DAO, people are very receptive. So what if all of your life you have been doing accounting? You go claim a proposal saying, I'm going to do strategy, and you make a submission. If that submission is really good, the entire community is going to rally behind you. They don't really care about which tribe you came from, what you bring with yourself, which is brilliant because you are essentially never going to get bored in your life. Like you feel like jumping to marketing, go do a good job at it, and you will be accepted. You feel like you want to start writing content when you're 50, go join a DAO, start writing contents, and who knows, you may become the star content writer in the community. And that's like a lot of money. People make salaries in 6 and 7 and 8 figures as well, doing full-time jobs for DAOs. So yeah.
Right. And so for someone not involved in Web3, could you explain what are the paths? It's like, okay, here someone listened to that brilliant interview and with what you just said, someone has the realization. So let's pretend that it's either someone already involved in Web3, but also someone not involved in Web3. What would be the next step, to act on what you just said?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just going to like throw out some terms here which will look scary for somebody who's not in Web3, but I'm pretty sure once you start diving deeper, it's like a piece of cake for you to walk on. See, what you need to really understand is that it's Web3 because there is a way of distributing rewards. It's a DAO because there is no centralized committee. That doesn't mean that the code you were writing as a developer or the strategy or the marketing ideas that you were coming up with yourself in the current company or the current role you are in is going to change. It still is the same thing. You're still going to write the same piece of code, but for a decentralized community. You're going to work with people whose home address maybe you don't know or whose faces you don't know because some people prefer being anonymous, but they're still people sitting behind screens. That's it. Nothing else changes. So if you go with that mentality, the first step is like really feeling confident about the fact that, so what, I'm a lawyer, I can go find something for me in this group of people, right? Like the second thing is you really go on and browse the DAOs that are out there, because you can go look at DAOs that are doing social media. You can go look at DAOs that are for influencers. You can go look at DAOs that are for finance or maths people
Did
or
there is any
accountants.
kind of a website that give a listing or where someone can find them? I'm thinking
Absolutely.
about, I'm trying to think about someone that have no knowledge, and it's like, okay,
Yeah.
it's if we can summarize exactly, like, okay, you have that insight right now that you can bring value to a DAO. Okay, here is what you have to do. First you go here, after you do that, etc., etc. So would you say that there is any website for someone to lend to?
A lot of them. And in fact, we also have one at DaoLens.com, but essentially the term you need to Google is called DAO Marketplace, right?
Okay.
Like, and you will run into tools like Deep DAO, right? Like DEEPDAO, Deep DAO. You will run into tools like DAO HQ, DAO HQ. You can try ourselves, like our website, DaoLens, we have a discover tool. There are tools like Truts, TRUTS.xyz, right? Like there are tons of them. There's no stopping, to be very honest on it. And like you probably don't even have to go for beyond the names that I just mentioned. Pick one, pick Deep DAO. You can go look at Masari, by the way, Masari Governor, MESSARI Governor, Masari Governor, and you will see that there are so many DAOs in there, right? Like, and you can go look at, oh, I am interested into music, so I'm just going to look on the DAOs that have something to do with music, and that's it. Now, once you are done with that, you will probably go to that website, right? Like that DAO will have a website or the DAO is going to have a page. What you need to understand is that the website is going to say what the DAO really does. But unless you start contributing, right? Like, and this contribution needs to be you basically just going and start, like, sort of imagine you're at a cocktail party and you go into a stranger and say hi. So all of these DAOs, right? Like they will have one common trait. They're either having a Telegram group, or they are having a WhatsApp group, or they are having a community forum on a platform like Discourse, or they are having a Slack group, or they are having a Discord group, right? Like, and the link is very clearly always mentioned. Either the tool that you are going to, something like DeepDAO will directly mention that link, or I would recommend always to go to the website to really understand what they do, and then make a decision that, okay, this looks like something I want to understand. Don't be scared. At this point in time, maybe you have 10 names shortlisted out of the 20 or 30 that you run into, saying that, okay, I want to try this out. Now, once you start joining the community, you will see there are certain rules of how the community is supposed to function and whatnot, right? Like, depending on whichever tool you are, there are always these segregations in terms of where discussion is happening. What does the DAO do? What is really the vision and the mission? What are the tasks and the bounties? Where are people hanging out? And these DAOs, if you have like something on a Discord, they do a good job, right? Like, for example, if you go to DaoLens.com and then you join our own Discord, you will see that there is a lot of sections, right? Like, it says that, hey, are you somebody who's interested in operations? There are certain things. Are you somebody who's interested in, for that matter, community discussions? Are you somebody who's interested in development? Are you interested in somebody who's just good at collecting information? There are all of these different things for you, right? Like, and all you have to do is go click on those discussions and just scroll through. If you scroll through, right, like, and scroll through the last 4 to 5 days of the chat, you will be able to get a sense of what they are discussing. Maybe not 100%, but you'll still have some idea. Looks like they're talking about a campaign. Looks like they're talking about a product. And most of these communities, they love it when new members go in and intro themselves. Trust me, when you go to an intro channel or the place where you're supposed to introduce yourself, it usually goes and says intro. You will probably see a lot of people like yourself coming and saying, hey, I have no idea about what DAOs are. I am good at this and this. Can somebody help me? Right? Like, if you just ask this, you will probably see a group of people rallying behind and saying, okay, Vikram, here is what you can really do. Why don't you go in and check this task out? Why don't you go read this document? Right? Like, and the truth is that you will really have to spend the first 4 or 5 days being a little uncomfortable, getting into these long chats, long discussions, and just understanding what they're trying to do and shoot your shot. But you just need one win, right? Like, so either somebody is going to come and help you, or you will maybe identify this one person who's also talking about the same stuff that you are interested in. Go hit them up on DM saying, hey, I'm new here. I'm genuinely here to contribute. I'm not somebody who's going to create ruckus and noise. Tell me how I can help you. And you're just supposed to put yourself out there, and they will themselves come and ask you, how much is your rate, or what are you going to charge? Or maybe they will send you to a bounty or a task which is already listed out there for you to take on with a rate, saying that if you complete this bounty, you're going to get paid $100, $200, right? Like, and that's it. You as a beginner, you don't have to sign any agreement. You don't have to sign any licensing, any job, employment offer, or so on. You can simply go say that, okay, I'm working on it. Look at whatever the ask is and do it. Sometimes the asks are very simple. Go to our website and write an introductory thread for beginners on what we do, and then publish it on Twitter and share that link, right? Like, if you are a legal person, maybe you don't want to write a tweet. You will go in and look at somebody who's also dealing with legal operations and say, hey, I have some thoughts on what you do, right? Like, and I want to share it with you, maybe draft a one pager. And as you start sharing it with people, you will realize that they will themselves ask you to join the right channels, talk to the right people, right? Like, this is a little slightly ambiguous step, because you will have no clear direction here. But what ends up happening is that if you're absolutely confused, even after a day or two, you have two options. Of course, you can always leave the community and start a new one, which is simpler to understand. Or most of these communities have what is known as a community call. Good communities mostly have what is known as a community call every week, right? Like, now everyone is welcome. Everyone who is in the community means you have joined that community. You're welcome to start, right? Like, and when you're welcome to start, you can just go join the call and hear people out. And in the call, towards the end, maybe you can ask a question in the chat, or maybe you can raise your hand in a Zoom and go ask them, hey folks, I am really new. I'm super confused. This is what I do. Do you think I should belong here and not? Do this 3-4 times, and you will yourself identify your tribe, your group of people. And then you have like a lot of money to make as well, because as people start knowing you, you will see, oh, now I understand how proposals are done. Maybe I did the first 3 proposals at a different rate, But now the next time onwards, I'm going to write an article. I'm going to ask them to pay me $200 per article. I'm going to ask them to pay me $500 per article. And if it is that you write content, go do it for 4 communities. Because again, unlike a company, no one is going to come and ask you, why are you doing it in 3 communities? Right? Like that's another beauty in DAOs. You can go work for as many communities whenever you like. You're going away, go away. You want to work at 2 in the night, go work at 2 in the night. You want to sit on a beach in Portugal and like sip a drink and then do the job, do it. Like you're going on a time off, go it. Like you don't really have to seek permissions from people, because DAO is essentially a group of people who are self-driven. So if you want to do it, there's work for you. If you want to take rest, you can go take rest. Somebody else will be doing the work at that time. And that's how I would say. The only thing which you need to understand is that when you're trying to go to this tool like DeepDAO and trying to join communities, sometimes you will not have access to these communities. And those are communities which are gated. For example, you need to have a certain amount of token to become a member. You remember we talked about a DAO where you have to invest a certain amount of tokens to become, to have a skin in the game. If you are an absolute beginner, I would recommend just not doing anything on that. Go to a community which is free, because there are a lot of them. They are not gated, and that's open for anyone to join and contribute and get a sense of what it is. And then there is no end to it. It's true that if a community is gated, the quality of discussion is higher. There are lesser number of people, there is lesser competition and so on. But you can always take your own time to understand this. 10 days of consistent efforts from your end, and I think you can be a master in whatever field or domain, as far as like identifying and discovering what you can work on and doing submission scores.
Perfect. So you have well described to someone that don't know anything about DAO, or that can bring value to a DAO without knowing that yet. But thanks to you, Vikram, it's something that we have just challenged today. What could you say about what, regarding innovation? What excites you the most with your view on the DAO? What are the recent innovation, or maybe what are the things that you would like to see happening?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the primary focus that at least I on a personal level have here at DaoLens and in general in my life is that we are still too early in the DAOverse, right? Like DAOs in the current form have a lot of problems. We talked about some of these frictions. We talked about the fact that 51 people may not show up on meetings, and sometimes it's inefficient, right? Like, which is why we talked about how many people end up doing centralized stuff. But that also means that there is an insane amount of opportunity for you to fix, because in the ideal way, as human beings, if you go look at how DAOs operate, the fact that you have the freedom to work from anywhere on your own terms, you decide what your salary is going to be, you decide which 5 communities you're going to work on, you decide who you want to be friends with. That's exactly how we as human beings think. So it's very obvious that DAOs are going to go more and more adoption, gonna get more and more adoption. But today there is a gap, and it's a cry for help from the whole ecosystem saying, hey, can you please help us get to that stage where when we have a proposal, more and more people are aware of it and they're voting, as opposed to just observing or ignoring, right? Like that's just one problem statement. Let's say there is some random person who's come into a community and you are a newcomer and they try to scam you out, which a lot of people will do. They'll go on and say, hey, you know what? I'm the official member. Official members never DM you. Mostly they never DM you. And if you get somebody saying, unless you share your wallet ID or so on, I will not let you give you access to the DAO, stay away from them. But essentially, if somebody like that is trying to do, there is a problem of, hey, how do you stop innocent newcomers from like really getting scammed? There's a problem of like, if a DAO was to get a legal opinion, where do they go on and talk to? There's this problem of if a DAO was to like probably track which all projects are going on, what are the project management tools that they can use? And it's a little ambiguous because these are very early days, but that's like insane opportunities for you. You can basically go define how the world should work in 10 years. If you're really good at identifying what are the problems, and if you're really good at working with people, you can't come up with a solution sitting in a room and like go pitch to DAOs and say, hey, let's start using this tool tomorrow onwards, because nobody's going to do it. But if you really get a buy-in from people saying, oh, wow, I think these are some of the ideas that I have. Do you want to collaborate with me? And you get 20 people to collaborate with you on a solution that all of you collectively came to, chances are highly likely you're all going to start using it. And then you're going to talk about it and the world is going to use it. And maybe it's going to need a lot of experimentation. But this whole idea, the possibility is the most exciting thing for me here. The second thing is, Robert, that even if you assume, right, like that's more about establishing DAOs as we know today, or getting into that stage where DAOs are no longer even tiny bit inefficient, right? Like, but the next thing is in the future, and there is already enough glimpses of it, there are bigger things at play. A DAO can become a member of another DAO. Imagine how cool that is, right? Like, so you have DAO to DAO collaboration, DAO to DAO networks. There are these people who are working across DAOs. Now, in a traditional world, if Robert has done 3 years of job in one company and 4 years of job on second company, and you go for a third job, you still have to explain what you did in the last 7 years. But that is not the case in Web3 because everything can really be tracked. We already know what you did. It's not about the role or the designation you had. If you commented on a post or if you really contributed to a proposal and that proposal brought in $1 million, you were a contributor in that thing which got the DAO $1 million. So that if that is made available, essentially you never have to sit for job interviews because it's all very clear what Robert has done and the fact that you are a reliable person. So these things are like how reputation flows. How can you make it easy for somebody who's done enough work in community one to not really even talk to anyone in community two, but for the community two folks to know that this person is a reliable person? Like this is reputation flow and DAO to DAO collaboration and a lot of stuff around governance, which is to say, how do you really get more people to get encourage them to like participate in voting and operations and things that seem like ambiguous at times. I think it's like all of these projects where I see like maybe opportunities to build hundreds and hundreds of solutions, and I am in here for the long run. So it's not like build one tool and that doesn't work, so you go to home. It's like, okay, this didn't work. Of course, it's not going to work because it's too early of a day. Let me try something new, and let me try something new, and let me try something new. That sort of a mentality. That is what personally drives me, and I think that's true for a lot of people here. Our simplest belief here at DaoLens also is that it's not about DAOs in the current definition working out. It's the idea that a group of people can come together and make stuff happen. That has been attempted 100,000 times over the time period that human beings have existed, be it under kings and queens and monarchs, and then under the industrial revolution, or even today's, right? Like we end up back until I think 2007, 2013 and 14, we were having these movements, open source, free the internet, right? Like, and so on, which was all about not really having somebody get a lot of power, but there was no way of making it work. For example, if you have an open source movement, it will thrive for the 2 years, 3 years you have the funds for, but then who's going to bear the server cost for making the computers run? In DAOs, that has an answer. Not in DAOs, like in the world of crypto, there is an answer to it. You can have a way of sustainably driving this because the costs can be distributed to everyone who associates with the cause. And that's brilliant. That is what we are all working towards here at DaoLens, which is like, hey, we know that for the first time there has been a demonstration that a group of people can come together and make stuff happen, and that there is a way of rewarding them for it. And if that's true and it aligns to our human values, it's just going to go up and up. So let's find the thing which is really closest to what is the final model that we'll probably know in 10, 15, 20, whatever number of years, maybe sooner. And that's how I look at the whole space and my personal thesis on why I'm even building for Web3 and DAOs.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for this information. What is the things that you know right now that you would love to have known 7 or 8 months before starting DaoLens?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think this is probably the first time I'm publicly talking about this. But one of the mistakes that I made as a founder was to go build for smaller communities, hoping that, hey, I'm anyway building with you. And what ended up happening was we built a couple of solutions which were more optimized for these smaller communities. But these communities were so small that when the crypto cycle flipped, they pretty much went back on their way of working, or they pretty much revised how they thought they would work, right? Like, and it essentially resulted in a group of tools that had to be redone when you were trying to position it for the rest of the community to work on. And in general, in the Web 2 world, the knowledge that anyone will come and tell you is more on these lines. Don't build with just a few people, because you would build something so custom that you will have to do a lot of effort to later expand it to everyone else. But in Web3, and as far as DAOs go, I think what we've realized is that there are 20, 30 top DAOs who have really understood, or who are big enough to not really get affected by these market prices. And that is where the true innovation is happening. So if you can work with the top DAOs to define something, you're not just working with one big DAO, you're actually also defining something which is probably going to be the base layer for the rest of the smaller DAOs to work on.
Okay.
And that's one learning that I would have loved to have when I was starting out, for sure.
Perfect. Thank you for all the knowledge. Did there is something that you wanted to say about DaoLens, or maybe about your background, that I didn't give you the opportunity to talk about?
No problem. I'll just probably briefly talk about what really DaoLens even does, because I've been using the name here and there again and again. We work with communities, and what we do is, if you are an admin, now see, there is again going to be a lot of words that you're probably not going to understand if you're a beginner, but hear me out. There's a discussion that happens on Discord or discourse. That discussion moves forward to something in the form of a forum proposal. Now, a group of people aligned to a forum proposal, what you do is you say, okay, let's vote on it. So that vote becomes a proposal in a tool like Snapshot, right? Like, now people vote on it. Let's say the vote gets accepted. Then you go on and say, okay, the vote has been accepted. Now we need to execute. So let's break it down into tasks. And you go to a platform like Dwork or Trello, right? Like, now, once the task is done, of course, somebody will come and claim the task. They will make submissions to it. So you have to review those tasks. That's happening in a separate place. Then you are supposed to review the task, you submit, like then people are paid out for the task that they were done. That's happening in yet another tool like Gnosis. And then finally, because you actually did a task, your reputation should go up because you were reliable. So that's happening in another tool, which is like a POAP or an NFT minting tool and so on.
Okay.
We realized that if you were working across 2 or 3 communities, because we just talked about how you can work for 2 to 3 communities, you are dealing with like 6-7 tools working just for one community. That means you're dealing with 20-21 instances of tool, and it's like a big mess. So we started questioning these fundamentals, and I started talking about how do you really make it super easy for anyone to go talk about stuff, to like connect the dots and whatnot. And as a matter of fact, I'm so happy, we yesterday only launched a product which sort of like is now publicly available. We have been building it for 6 months for anyone to understand what we do internally at DaoLens, and we work with community managers. Now, these community managers are people who are Web3 community holders. They could be DAOs, they could be protocols, they could be creators trying to run their fan base and manage their fan base and probably even sell some merchandise. It could be educators trying to have a group of students hanging out and whatnot, right? Like, so I'm just going to drop the link to the post that summarizes what the tool is about, Robert, for you to probably append below the talk later on. But essentially, that is what DaoLens is up to. And then now we are working on a bunch of other ideas. For example, what really happens when you have a grant? When a community is giving out a grant, how are you going to really track what happened to the funds? What happened to so many proposals that were coming in? Who's going to review them? Then comes the idea of, okay, if somebody like you, who's an absolute beginner, is coming into a community, how do you get them activated? How do you help hold their hand? Because again, there is no HR. So we have a tool for that, onboarding. And DaoLens is essentially a suite of tools. So if you're onboarding someone, if you're trying to manage community operations, if you're trying to manage grants, if you're trying to do something around payouts, if you're trying to do something around voting, we take care of all of it, right? Like, and that's pretty much what we do on a very high level. It's a tool that's sent mostly to community admins, but it's used by contributors. So we market the product to anyone who's starting a community out. It's free of cost, and you should absolutely check it out, because we have built this based on learnings over 9-10 months of like working with the best of the communities, and at least 200 plus community leaders have given their thoughts and inputs at some point in time or the other. We're actually being used by a whole lot of communities as well. So yeah.
Perfect. So Vikram, thank you very much, because I think that you have done a very great job to like demystify what DAO is for a beginner, explain where is the pitfall, what can be the opportunity, where anyone involved in Web3 or not involved in Web3 can be involved with DAO. And now you land a white hook with your tools and basically the projects that you have just launched. So thank you for your time. Thank you for everything. It was a wonderful episode around DAO. Do you have a last word that you want to land?
No, I just think like if you're curious about DAOs, jump into a DAO, and I think you will figure it out. Like it's really not that hard, and trust me, I was in your spot a few years back, and I think you're still too early. Like if you get into DAOs today, and if DAOs are to become a thing, you would probably become one of the OGs when you reflect back 10 years later, and you will thank the stars for it. So just get in, you will be able to do it. That's pretty much it.
Perfect. It's going to be the closing of that episode. Thank you again, Vikram. It was wonderful to talk to you. And I'm going to say to you in another time on Twitter or LinkedIn or on social.
Sure. Thanks, Robert. Bye-bye.
Bye.